Greetings fellow humans, and welcome! Today I thought it might be fun to introduce you to some of the old sewing books and dress manuals in my collection and share with you some of the weird and wonderful things that I find in them. If you happen to be new here, then hello, I'm Emily. I make vintage and historical inspired clothes and costumes, do research deep dives into various bits of textile and fashion history, and share a lot of video clips of my cats. But today is not about my cats. Today is about this book, Clothing for Moderns. Clothing for Moderns is a 1949 dress manual published by the Macmillan Company in New York. Its intention was to help young women, particularly freshman and sophomore college women, dress for success. So why do I, a 30-year-old Brit, have this sitting around on my bookshelf? Well, because this book belonged to my grandmother, who somehow acquired a second-hand copy of it in the early 1950s, and I know that's when she got it, because she wrote in the front cover, "Inherited by H.M. Page, November 1951. According to my mum, my grandmother didn't actually use this book, or not that my mum could remember anyway. It was just, in her words, some terribly old-fashioned thing that sat on the bookshelf. But it was clearly of enough interest that my mum and her sisters thumbed through it during their teens in the 70s, and were so amused by its contents that they nicknamed it Clothing for Morons, which my mum still calls it, and what I will be hoping with all my might I managed to avoid calling it for this entire video. Wish me luck. Now. One of my absolute favourite things, other than historical knowledge and context, about reading through vintage and antique sewing manuals is how they are written. The angle that every book approaches things from can be pretty fascinating in and of itself, but what I love is they can be hilariously catty and hugely dramatic. It genuinely never ceases to amuse me how seriously these authors take the subject and how urgent they make it all seem. For example, I love how clear and strangely principled this author's approach to clothing seems in the first chapter. After saying that all young women want to learn to be sophisticated, the book sets out a sane and efficient philosophy of dress, which consists of 6 points. You ready? Wear attractive clothing rather than appear dowdy. Select what we need rather than what fashion decrees. Plan to buy rather than be sold. Be increasingly independent of parent and teacher in making choices. Respect those whose service or job prevents a fashionable garb. Train for and succeed in some career. It has another numbered list of points under that one to explain the skills and understandings that readers will need to solve clothing problems, as it puts it, and these 4 points are as follows. An appreciation of the importance of personal appearance as an asset. An effective understanding of costs in time, money, energy, and skill as they affect your choices. An appreciation of textiles and clothing based on some understanding of the economic and social conditions involved in their production and in your choice of them. Some skill in creating costumes involving making as well as assembling. But the parts of this book that I find truly fascinating are less to do with making clothes and more to do with the multitudes of opinions it shares on personal appearance, appropriate interpersonal behaviour, good hygiene and makeup practice, financial responsibility, shopping correctly, and far more. So let me share with you just a few of my favourites. In a section talking about standards of work and the importance of improving your sewing and making skills over time, the importance of criticism is highlighted, actively encouraging readers to seek it out. Whenever possible, welcome the opportunity of having your work and personal appearance judged by others. Consult other members of the class who are also trying to develop standards. Interestingly, it also lays out advice on how to give criticism. When you are asked to criticise another girl or her work, courteously and encouragingly state the best points first. Then select only 1 or 2 of the features that most obviously need improving. State why you think so and give suggestions of methods for improvement. Use as much tact as possible in making suggestions. Hurt feelings usually result not from what is said, but from the spirit or the way in which the criticism is offered. By making these judgments, you yourself are benefiting, for only by making judgments do we grow. Not sure about that one. If you are not sure, but reasonably sure, put your thought in the form of a question. For example, I wonder if that is the most becoming colour. What would you think of using cream instead of white for those buttons? Is there any good reason why you cut the buttonholes up and down? These rhetorical questions soften the blow, so to speak, and give room for discussion on the pros and cons of the problem. They're also reasonably passive-aggressive. Now, the bits where, in my opinion, Clothing for Moderns gets really interesting is when it starts to tackle personal appearance. At the beginning of the second chapter, it asks, is it ever right to cross one's knees or lean one's elbows on the table? What is the fashionable posture today? What law of art is violated if the seams of one's hose are crooked? Isn't it dangerous to use deodorants? Will shaving make hair coarser? What is the sense of going to a tea when you know you'll be bored? How do my measurements compare with the Hollywood ideal? The Greek ideal? Is it a fad, or is it good taste to use white powder and no rouge? It then states, any girl will be more attractive and have more self-confidence if she has 1. Poise and a well-balanced personality, 2. Good habits of speech, 3. Good manners, 4. Good posture, 5. Good health, 6. Spick-and-span grooming and natural makeup, 7. Her clothes worn in the right way, with an air. Whatever that means. Interestingly, there are sections of this chapter dedicated to attractiveness, about personality and social interaction, and they really tickled me. Good health, calm nerves, easy posture, consciousness of power from knowing something worthwhile, or from having a service to perform or knowing that one is well groomed and well dressed, are not only the causes but also the effects of poise. Lack of poise is characterized by and caused by fear, timidity, and nervous tension in group situations. It's a vicious cycle, isn't it? Calling me out. Learning to do a few things well, being interested more in the other person than in oneself, cultivating relaxation and emotional control are not always easy, but are well within your powers. A little later on, there's some advice for introverts about how to be more personable. If you are shy, overly sensitive, hate to meet people, or are ill at ease in a group, you might be classed as an introvert. To improve this condition, you should not evade social functions. Make a point of meeting a few people and talking to them. Find someone who is more timid than you are and make that person comfortable. Make yourself contribute to class discussions. Belong to some kind of club. Show proper appreciation when you are pleased with something that has been done for you. Don't be one of the girls who forgets to say thank you. Stick up for your rights and make some decisions for yourself. Practice walking, speaking, and modelling garments in public. Avoid clothes that overshadow your personality, and give considerable thought to choosing clothes that enhance your good points and make you feel right. Now you know that meme that's all, oh, there are all these articles telling introverts how to be more outgoing, but you don't see the reverse. You never see articles telling extroverts to be quiet, do you? Well, this book does. In the first sentence of the next paragraph, after saying, if you're an extrovert, the opposite of an introvert, the first words are, avoid talking too much. So here is Clothing for Moderns advice for extroverts. Avoid talking too much. Don't brag, but listen to other girls. Don't be bossy, but ask for information. Don't be argumentative or too positive. Don't be a joiner and belong to all the clubs. Avoid flashy costumes and sloppy, careless attire. Don't exaggerate. That's it. That's their advice for extroverts. Very different vibe. Their advice for introverts is so encouraging and seemingly gentle. The advice for extroverts is just be quiet, take up less space. You're not as interesting as you seem to think you are. Stop bragging, stop exaggerating. It's so harsh. Something else I find interesting is that the chapter on being attractive finishes with a section called Not a Moral Issue that makes some really important points that I think everyone could do with remembering. Although you have the good fortune to possess natural good looks, and although you have achieved the poise that comes from being well groomed and smartly dressed, don't be conceited about it. Don't feel sorry in a condescending, snobbish way for those who haven't solved this problem. There may be people who are sacrificing smart dressing for some other worthwhile achievement. Creative artists, homemakers, community workers, and professional women are busy people who give so much to the world that they cannot always afford the time necessary to appear smartly turned out. Neatness and cleanliness are about all that seem necessary in emergency living. Beauty, literature, or high thinking of enduring worth more often than not, are produced by wearers of plain, ill-fitting and unattractive clothes. Don't make fun of anyone who dresses differently from your ideas. Don't confuse fashion with goodness. Perhaps you have noticed that some fashionably dressed women and beautifully dressed girls are far from being loved and popular. There are plenty of other sections where Mabel D. Erwin wrote with fantastic bluntness when discussing the need for sportswear in a college woman's wardrobe, she pontificated. Every college girl should participate in some active sport. If you think you haven't the time or physical health for it, perhaps you need to reorient your thinking. Look, this author definitely has very specific opinions and procedures she thinks everyone should follow. When discussing assets in the chapter on wardrobe building, she says, "It is necessary to find out what you have in personal assets as well as in your wardrobe before making any plans for accumulating more clothes and other belongings. First, analyze your personal appearance. Then analyze your present wardrobe, then seek advice." She also has an astonishing number of opinions about hats. She first discusses hats on page 116, stating that college girls don't pay enough or give enough attention to their hats. They need to be more particular in securing better quality, better lines in the shape, and less trimming. They need to be concerned with wearing them with style. And then directs readers to page 177 to the hats section of the chapter on shopping excursions. And there she expounds on the subject for 4 pages. Instead of buying several hats at $1 or $1.98 each, see if you can't get a better quality of felt in a more distinctive shape, though of classic style, for $4 or $5. It will last longer, go with more things, and give you more individuality. Make your own dress and pay more for hats to secure good costumes. The following paragraph discusses creating or altering hats on the cheap, saying, "You may be able to concoct a few inexpensive hats, renovate some old ones, or indulge in an occasional bit of frivolous effect to fill in and give you a change. Steam old trimmings and hats over a tea kettle, press old felts and ribbons." And then comes a sentence that is one of my favourite in the entire book, because instead of saying, in a reasonable, practical or balanced way, that trying to improve or fix hats that are beyond the point of repair maybe isn't a worthwhile endeavour, instead, Clothing for Moderns gives the most dramatic take possible in just 3 words. Those words are, discard the hopeless. And when you read that, in the context of the paragraph, it genuinely seems like Mabel D. Erwin may have temporarily become a victim of some kind of demonic possession. You may be able to concoct a few inexpensive hats, renovate some old ones, or indulge in an occasional bit of frivolous effect to fill in and give you a change. Steam old trimmings and hats over a tea kettle, press old felts and ribbons.
Discard the hopeless.
Tack, tint, and clean to freshen the old. To restore a veil, press it between layers of wax paper.
Discard the hopeless.
It's just a bit extra in it. I also love how black and white some of the advice in this book is. For example, the advice it gives on what to do if a garment's pattern is too big to fit on the fabric that you want to use. Where there is a definite shortage of fabric, never cut off grain. Whoops. But decide which of the following alternatives would be wiser for you. Buy more fabric. Is it available? Will it be worth the trip to town and the cost? If so, which pieces should be saved for the new fabric so that the least yardage will be necessary? Cut some pieces crosswise or bias. Will it produce a more or less satisfactory design? Will it wear as well? Piece certain sections. Can the piecing be made invisible? Facings and linings may be pieced, but the piecing seam may leave an imprint on the outer garment when pressed. Shorten pieces. Check the pattern again on yourself to be certain that the style is not affected. Narrow some pieces. Gathered sections may be made less full. Skirts may have some of the flare removed. Pleats may be narrowed or entirely omitted. Supplement the material. Use another material for facings, trimmings, or parts such as yokes, collars, bands, or pockets. Save on the seams. Trim off part of the seam allowance on such pieces as belts, bands, and ruffles, but not on silhouette seams. Abandon the project. Use another style of pattern entirely, or use the material for another article. And it appears Mabel D. Erwin had some very rigid opinions about what constituted age-appropriate clothing. The high school girl should wear teenage or junior styles, including perky, ruffled fashions, snug waistlines, princess cuts, if with some softening touches, crisp cottons, flowered styles. At college age, these styles should be reserved for indoor wear. The college girl may choose youthful cottons too, but made up in more tailored ways. For parties, the freshman wears best cap sleeves, shoulder ruffles, high, square, and sweetheart necklines, pastels. The older college girl can wear better high, round necklines, more formal décolletage and drapes, tubular dinner dresses, black, and glitter. The career girl or young matron does not wish to appear kiddish, but to be well dressed. She should not appear mannish or overly severe. Ah yes, severity, that thing that I particularly appreciate, nay, aspire to in my personal aesthetic, and is apparently one thing about me that Mabel Erwin would have heartily disliked and intensely disapproved of. It just never stops being funny to me how, pointedly judgmental this book is. For example, when talking about colour in dress, a girl with quiet personality is eclipsed by large areas of bright colour, but she appears washed out in drab, colourless outfits. She should seek subtle and interesting colour combinations, while a girl with a forceful personality can wear bright colours, she should not wear them on all occasions. I also discovered the use of some frankly unnecessary language in some surprising places. For example, when discussing rolled hems, the work. Where does it say the work? There. The work is more easily done if the material is crisp, firm, freshly pressed, and if your hands are clean. A dusting of talcum or French chalk may be needed, but a certain moistness at your fingertips is essential. Why? Why did they phrase it like that? In the creepiest possible way. Oh, Mabel, I've just got to hope you knew not what you did. No, I'm not happy about it. Moving on, there are a few other bits here and there that I found pretty amusing, one of which is at the start of chapter 22, repairs. You see, every chapter in this book begins with a series of rhetorical questions that the chapter then goes on to answer, and this one really tickled me. Aren't the new press-on patches better than darning? Where can I learn how to turn the collar on a man's shirt? How can I learn to not dislike a mending job? And finally, is it sissy for a boy to mend his own? Now, if you didn't know, the word sissy has a pretty distinct homophobic and transphobic past. By the 1930s, it was widely used as an insult and a slur to mock and demean men and boys who didn't adhere to or embody rigid ideas of masculinity, or who exhibited traits, behaviours, or qualities that were considered feminine. By the 1980s, the word sissy had started to be reclaimed by some gay men, but it is still used as a slur and an insult with transphobic, homophobic, and misogynistic undertones to this day. So it isn't really the use of the word that I find funny. What I think is funny is that the book never answers that question. And it's the only question in the entire book that doesn't get answered in the chapter that follows it. So I have to assume that either Mabel D. Erwin couldn't get to the bottom of that one, or she couldn't make her mind up. And just brushing aside the casual anti-queerness, there are other parts of this book I've read that have just made it crystal clear that the author would have just fundamentally disapproved of me in every conceivable way. For instance, in chapter 25, Designing Your Own Patterns, the book says that patterns are made in one of three ways: by drafting, by draping fabric on a dress form, or by modifying a foundation pattern. Drafting is a system of drawing patterns with mechanical precision based on body measurements. Not the way I do it, Mabel. Not the way I do it. The way I do it is based on quite a lot of guesswork, and my drawing patterns has far more to do with trial and error than mechanical precision. To this book's credit, though, there is a lot of genuinely useful and interesting information. So here are some choice excerpts to demonstrate. Planning a wardrobe has the broad objectives of making you happy in your clothes and self-confident or poised because you know you are appropriately dressed, all for the same amount of money or less than you would spend buying clothes haphazardly. Besides being becoming and keyed in colour to one's accessories and the rest of the wardrobe, a school outfit should 1. Be well tailored, look neat, hold a press. 2. Be durable, colour fast, pre-shrunk, hold its shape. 3. Be easy to care for, free of fussy trims, cleanable at little expense or trouble. Very sensible. Have fewer garments. Select with greater care so that each garment is suitable to you, wearable practically all the year round, except for the coldest or warmest days, and appropriate for many different occasions. Learn to recognise the status of a fashion. A style should be in good fashion for you at least 3 years. If you buy a style at full price when it is coming in, it will bring you more satisfaction and value than if you pay half price for it when it's going out. Learn to discriminate between a fad and a classic. Learn to adapt the fashion in a practical way to yourself and your needs. Buy as good quality as you can afford. Especially stress quality before quantity. We don't mean that the most expensive articles are best, do we? A blouse you've made yourself for 70 cents may outwear a ready-made one that costs $2.70. On the other hand, your homemade blouse may not make you very happy because it lacks style. The ready-made one must always be dry cleaned, but it stays fresh looking longer and you always feel right in it. Carefully weigh all these considerations in connection with quality. Estimate the cost per wearing. If you wear a $40 suit 4 times a week for 5 months each of 2 years, or a total of 180 times, it is costing you 25 cents a wear. If you wear a $10 evening dress 10 times, it is costing you $1 an evening. It is wiser for a college girl to pay more for a suit than an evening gown, but a concert singer might be justified in paying more for an evening dress. I also find the financial advice this book offers pretty sensible and sound, if a little cutthroat. You can be generous without being extravagant, and you should carry your weight in whatever group you find yourself. If the girls in your group are spending more than you can afford in some ways, be frank with them, and they will respect your reason. If they are spending on a level you cannot maintain, find another group. And it goes on to say, do not fritter away your time and your parents' money because you follow the pace set by some college friend who has no other standards. She can still be your friend, if she is worth it, even though you manage your time and money more efficiently than she does. Like I said, a bit cutthroat, but yeah, if you're in a friend group where everyone is consistently outspending you on all fronts, it can lead to issues. I also think the advice in the section titled Economy and Philosophy of Buying Fabrics has its merits. When several grades of quality are available in the material you have decided upon, usually the most costly is a luxury material, the refinement of which you may be able to do without. The lowest grade is usually too sleazy for a dress or not worth your labour to make. The middle grades are usually the best buys from the standpoint of durability, but be sure you know what are the earmarks of high, medium and low grades. Sometimes the best grade in a mail order catalogue is only average grade in the general market. It is wiser to buy the best quality in a price grouping you can afford, rather than a low grade in the more expensive class of merchandise. Remnants at half price are not economical if they cause you to buy too much or too little, or cause you to produce a dress ugly or ordinary in design. Buy only the needed findings such as belts and buttons. Take good care of them. They may be used on other garments. Don't buy extra buttons unless you are habitually careless, and you should overcome this tendency. Self-trims such as loops, belts, buckles, covered buttons, arrowheads, set-in pockets, frogs, and tassels, if well made, add distinction and sometimes elegance. Such work reduces cost of decoration, but increases your labour costs. Cutting off grain, whether through haste, carelessness, or the desire to save a few inches, is a false economy. The resulting difficulties in fitting and stitching, or the resulting unbalanced appearance of the garment, will detract from your satisfaction of it. And then my favourite one. After having made a choice and completed the dress to the best of your ability, secure as much satisfaction as you can from it. Enjoy it. Appreciate it. You may need even to educate your family as to the superior qualities of this garment. Simply be your natural self and wear it with poise. There are some pretty specific and quite helpful instructions in a chapter titled Buying and Preparing Patterns, and from pages 200 to 206, there's guidance for a multitude of alterations to commercial patterns, including how to shorten or lengthen a blouse, how to shorten or lengthen skirt gores, bodice adjustments for broad shoulders, narrow shoulders, square shoulders, sloping shoulders, round shoulders, sway back, a hollow chest, or a full bust, skirt adjustments such as how to widen the hips and the waist, how to widen only the hips and not the waist in a way that does alter the hemline, how to widen the hips and not the waist in a way that doesn't alter the hemline, and how to adjust for a large abdomen, a prominent abdomen, and for a prominent back hip and sway back. But that is not all, because it also includes guidance for 11 different alterations to adjust sleeve fit. A couple of pages later in the book, it has what it calls practical helps about preparing patterns for use that are genuinely helpful. 1. It is easier and less destructive of your tissue pattern to pin it in tucks than to slash and spread. Therefore, buy patterns a little too large rather than too small if you cannot buy your exact size. 2. Do not try to change a size 14 to a size 16 or vice versa. This is pattern grading and is better left to more experienced workers. Buy the correct size at the beginning, not to be judgy or anything. 3. Tucks are not as accurate in heavy paper as lapping slashed edges. If you dislike slashing your pattern because you want to keep it for other uses, cut a duplicate on which to make your alterations. 4. Draw grain lines on a fresh piece of paper and lay the pattern down on it before slashing and spreading to avoid misplacing or confusing parts. To avoid confusion, draw matching notches on each line before slashing so that the pattern can be put back together again easily and accurately. 5. A gauge is more accurate and convenient for measuring than a tape or yardstick. 6. Pin a piece of paper under the part you need to change, such as the shape of the neck or the underarm curve. 7. Small increases in length and width may be allowed during cutting. A line can be formed on the cloth with pins and chalk. Another plan is to cut all around the edges of the pattern except for one to be changed, unpin the pattern, slip it over as far as desired, pin carefully on the straight grain again, and cut to follow the rest of the pattern exactly. Now, there is also a whole chapter in Clothing for Moderns on using patterns, and the bit I was most intrigued by was about economical pattern placement. Why I found this so interesting is because sewing is a big part of my family history, and sewing economically was really important. My grandmother made almost all of her own clothes, and when my mother was a teenager and a young woman, she made most of her own clothes as well, mostly out of necessity. Because money wasn't very plentiful, the only way my grandmother and my mother could wear the latest styles was by making them, often out of end rolls of fabric bought off the market, or out of existing garments. And doing that means you often don't have quite as much fabric to make a garment out of as that garment's pattern says you need. In my family, we call figuring out how to make a garment out of less fabric than you technically need colophogling. I always ignore the pattern layout instructions that come with commercial patterns because, quite honestly, they're trash. They are never the most effective pattern layout. They almost always take up far more room on the fabric than they need to, and that leads to a massive amount of unnecessary fabric wastage. But the thing I found so interesting about reading through the economical pattern placement section of this book is that it is quite literally a step-by-step explanation of how to do something that I had just learned by osmosis. But before we get to the instructions on how to do it, Clothing for Moderns lays out the objectives in placing pattern pieces without a layout, because that is just how this book rolls in it. So, 1. To produce all pieces cut correctly as to grain and design in cloth. 2. To have all scraps left over in a few large pieces rather than many small pieces. 3. To develop thrifty habits by saving yardage. This training saves money, enables you to use remnants more cleverly, and prepares you for a position in a dress or pattern factory. Then they finally get to the instructions, and to be honest, they're pretty thorough. So, guiding principles for the economy of layout are: 1. Never cut any until a trial shows the best location for all pieces. 2. Make a temporary layout using either weights or 2 pins per pattern to keep the grain line of the pattern on the grain line of the cloth. 3. Begin with the largest pattern pieces at opposite ends of the cloth and work toward the centre to fit in smaller pieces. This leaves most of the scraps in one large piece rather than several small ones. 4. Place the wider ends of the large pieces at the cut ends of the material. This leaves a wider space rather than a narrow bottleneck open along one side in which to slide another piece. 5. Place all pieces close together so as not to waste any cloth. 6. Dovetailing refers to fitting pieces similar in shape next to each other as is done in jigsaw puzzles. 7. Place as many pieces as possible along the selvage sides in order to leave the fold side free for halves which must go on a fold, or to leave one wide space to open out rather than 2 single narrow ones. 8. If necessary, refold the material just wide enough to fit a pattern, leaving all excess to one side, not in 2 narrow sections. 9. To ensure cutting a pair, cut both pieces at the same time by folding the material with the right sides together, or wrong sides together. 10. Use pins or paper duplicates of patterns to mark off areas reserved for later cutting. 11. Have all pattern pieces labelled as right or left section on the cloth, right side up. And reading through that section genuinely raised the question for me, is this where my grandma learned how to do that? Is that how and where she learned to cut out pattern pieces in order to save fabric? And did she just teach that to my mother, who then taught that to me? Is this book the source of that knowledge? Now, there were a few points when I was reading this that I was really struck by the reality of life at that point in time. While I am vaguely aware that electric washing machines weren't really widely available or used until the late 40s to early 50s in the US and well into the 1950s in the UK, actually reading the advice and instructions for laundry really made me think about what not having this basic amenity that I am completely accustomed to was actually like. Chapter 21, Launder Your Own, begins with Clothing for Modern's customary collection of rhetorical questions, and then begins in earnest with the statement, "Every girl has the problem of keeping her clothes clean." It continues, "Even though large boxes of soiled clothes get sent home for laundering, a certain amount of handwork must be done right in your own lavatory. Of course, washing out undergarments and hose is a nightly ritual no matter where you live. Most modern dormitories have handy laundry rooms where several girls can work at the same time. It's more fun that way. Where laundry rooms charge a fee by the hour, plan your hour most efficiently. Bring garments that need pressing to work on while the washed cottons dry. Some laundry rooms have heated dryers that will speed your efforts with cottons. They will ruin rayons, wools, and silks, however. I also find the direction for preparation before laundering quite interesting, because it directs readers to examine garments and do any necessary mending before laundering them, something I could definitely stand to get into the habit of doing. It also really struck me how harsh modern methods of laundering can be, and how that can lead clothes to wear out more quickly. In the instructions for washing cottons and linens, readers are warned, only cottons and linens should be soaked, and then not over 10 minutes in warm, not hot suds. Squeeze the clothes through the suds vigorously. Don't use a washboard unless necessary for heavy soil, such as might be on gym clothes, hiking socks, laboratory aprons, and slacks. It is hard work. Moral: don't let clothes get so dirty. Use cooler water, milder soap, and work faster for coloured cottons. Now granted, modern dyes are far more colour fast, so the concerns about colours running isn't as much of an issue. But it really makes me question how necessary my 2.5 hour long 40-degree wash cycle is. And there are many more thought-provoking and handy tidbits littered throughout this book, including a 15-point list of the underlying principles of good management in dressmaking that outlines both the order in which to tackle different elements of construction and how to keep your pieces and process organized, a series of 14 practical exercises on the sewing machine to help readers build skill before attempting to make a garment, an illustration of how to correctly hold your needle and wear your thimble for hand sewing, a 12-point guide on how to use pins, and an entire chapter on pressing that outlines the difference between pressing and ironing, what equipment you need, how to make steam, and technical descriptions of how to iron cloths made of different fibres. There were also some kind of unexpected bits. Some parts of this book are far more progressive than I expected for 1949, and certain sections particularly stood out. In the portion discussing personal hygiene, there's a bit that relates specifically to menstruation, and it is surprisingly practical and down to earth. The menstrual cycle is a normal bodily process. It is not only inaccurate, but old-fashioned to use the terms unwell or sick. Normal exercise, warm baths, and warm clothing increase circulation, which prevents congestion of the blood, the cause of discomfort or cramps. Daily baths are a must, but avoid extremes of temperature and too strenuous exercise. Keep warm and get some extra rest. It is natural to be depressed, irritable, or tense during or preceding the menstrual period. Something else I was surprised to see, based on the date of publication and the context of this being an American book published before the end of Jim Crow laws, was this passage in the section about using colour in your wardrobe. The book has the usual advice for blondes, brunettes, redheads, etc., and then says this: dark skins with dark hair look best in dark, rich colours and black. Pastels and blue-white should be avoided. Dark skins with weak colouring in hair and eyes look well in deep reds, medium dull green, beige. Black, white, and beige need colour added, such as a bright red flower. And honestly, I was pretty surprised to read advice for people with dark skin and dark hair in a 1949 dress manual. Now, do not get me wrong, this book is by no means inclusive. Every photograph or drawing of a woman in this book is a white woman. But seeing as there are dress manuals and wardrobe building guides that are published to this day that literally do not acknowledge the existence of people that aren't white, let alone provide any useful information for them, I was pleased to at least see it discussed. I also found it interesting that the book has a definite concern with the ethics of any purchases that someone makes. In the chapter on quality in fabrics, the book says, when you buy tempting bargains that soon prove to be shoddy merchandise, you are not only cheating yourself, but you are helping to undermine the conditions for all the producers, from the farmer who grows the cotton or the sheep, to the people who spin and weave it, and those who sell it. If consumers never bought poor stuff, there would be no market for it, and manufacturers would cease to make it. Chapter 5 of this book is dedicated to how one should shop, and the introductory section really focuses on recognizing quality items, saying, you must train yourself to buy to the best advantage, so that you will get the most for your money. The most what? Certainly not the most articles or the most cloth, but the most satisfaction and usefulness possible with what time, money, and energy you can put into it, with justice or fairness to others. Even though you cannot now afford articles of higher grade and excellent tailoring, you should cultivate the ability to recognize different grades without judging entirely by price. Try to discover reasons why high-priced merchandise is so marked. The hidden values may be worth the price. The ability to recognize grades of quality is one of the most important skills to acquire during these years of your life. Honestly, I find the focus on consumer responsibility and respect for garment and retail workers very thought-provoking. A background appreciation of the men and women who produce the merchandise and of world conditions affecting the distribution of the things we desire is essential to the educated woman today. A knowledge of present laws that protect the consumer, as well as a knowledge of laws that protect the retailer and the manufacturer, would seem as necessary as knowing how to make change, how to compute interest, or how to combine colours. The chapter includes a 14-point buying guide, and a few of the points really stood out to me. For example, do not take unfair advantage of other people's time. Be courteous to salespeople and other shoppers. Shop at less busy hours. Do not ask for special delivery and return privileges. Ask yourself why you are so eager to have or buy the things you see. Be conscious of what or who is affecting your choices. Psychology should be a tool to help you understand your emotions and instincts. Do you permit your friends, the radio, advertising, desire for change, a clerk, a desire to keep up with others, or cool judgment and taste to guide you in your choices? Have you taken unfair advantage of someone's time in the garment you are buying or wearing? Was it made by underpaid workers or in unsanitary conditions? And I think it is such an interesting perspective to look at clothing purchases through the lens of, are you as an individual taking advantage of anyone by purchasing it? The current discussion around fast fashion and garment workers mostly looks at things from the perspective of these companies are taking advantage of and exploiting workers, and by buying things from them, you are supporting that company. But changing that perspective and looking at things through the lens of this company is exploiting and taking advantage of these workers, and by purchasing this garment, I am also taking advantage of these workers, is far more confronting. But realistically, is true. The only reason that clothing is available so cheaply is because of worker exploitation. So by buying that, I am taking advantage of that exploitation. So what are my overall thoughts on this book? Well, I was going to try and give it some kind of rating, but I have no idea what kind of criteria I would use or how I would come to any kind of definitive decision. It's fascinating and informative and surprising and ridiculous. It is a relic of a bygone era that provides a sort of window into the past. I have learned so much from reading it, not only in terms of historical context for my grandmother's youth, but also in terms of useful, practical sewing and clothing advice. So I hope you have enjoyed diving into clothing for morons with me. Do you have any weird old books lying around? Do you have any favourite bits of them? Please talk to me about it in the comments, because I love stuff like that and would love to hear about it. If you're new here and you'd like to keep hanging out, that'd be super cool, but whether you decide to keep hanging out or not, I hope everything's okay in your world, and I'll see you all the next time. Oh, I was going to take all my little thingies out so people on the internet didn't get mad at me. I can do that in a second. Can I? Yes. Maybe? I don't know. Where are you? The bit on 116. College girls, give me the thing! Show me your ness. Huh, no. Wait, is it not? But, did I write it on the wrong page? Did I write down the wrong page? Yeah! No. Page 58, come to me. Come on, you bastard. Come here. You sneaky little... Alright. 208, 208, 208. I need to change my battery. Oh no. The stress. Yeah, all the bits. No. Handy dandy bookmark that I put in there. Like a real boy. I'm so tired. My legs are so sore. I do not like sitting on this for this long. Oh, it took forever. Not my fave. But oh well. Goodbye. Oh, my butt. It's unhappy. No. Oh, my back. Oh, no. Oh, old people noises. It's me. I'm the old people.